Ed Gein, born on August the 27th, 1906 at La Crosse, Wisconsin, United States. Now, this man is one of the most notorious serial killers in history. So much so that his monstrous crimes and acts have influenced some of the most iconic horror movies in history. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Some movies maybe you didn't even know were influenced by Ed Gein. And that's what this video is going to be about. So let's get straight into it. So Ed Gein was known as just a normal everyday guy. He was a farmer and a handyman, and people described him as someone you could go into the shop and he'd be there getting milk or whatever, and he would just seem like a normal guy. He would ask you how your day was and just talk about normal things. There was nothing unusual about him per se, and that's why nobody really suspected that this guy could hurt anybody. He couldn't possibly perform the crimes that that were gonna come out. So basically, the first inspiration, one of the most well-known inspirations, were Psycho. Now, Psycho is one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. Nobody can argue that. No, literally not one person. You know, whenever it came out, it shocked everybody. It was, Alfred Hitchcock's just came out of nowhere with this, and it was just insane. It terrified so many people that watched it. And it was actually very heavily inspired by Ed Gein. Now how? Well, basically, when Ed Gein was a kid, he tried his best to go out and meet friends. As you do as a kid, right? But his mother, whose name is Augusta Gein, didn't like this. She didn't like the fact that her sons, because Ed Gein's brother was also in the same predicament. His name was Henry. So both Ed and Henry trying to make friends. The mother hated it, so basically gave off to them and read the Bible to them multiple times, over and over and over. So Ed, being pretty much isolated and lonely. I mean, you can imagine how lonely that would be. Just stuck listening to your mom and listening to the Bible repeatedly, and just looking out your window and seeing all the kids playing together and knowing that you can't be part of that world. It would be sad, but because they lived in a farm and it was way out in the countryside, you can imagine maybe it could be a little worse. Probably wouldn't have been as bad if they were living in the city, where there would be no avoiding kids, and maybe, you could have pretended or had friends secretly, but whenever they're in the country, in a farm, there's really nobody around. So it's a very daunting, isolating environment. So whenever Ed and Henry's father passed away, he died of heart disease, if I recall. He was a carpenter. So then, because he passed away, Ed Gein and his brother had to go and get jobs. The odd job to support now. And there was an incident where Ed and Henry both started a fire. It was to get rid of vegetation. And unfortunately, this ended in tragedy, as Henry was found passed away, and the result was head trauma. Now, there was no evidence to back it up and say, oh, Ed did it or anything. It was, brushed aside as an accident or whatever, But yeah, so he passed away, and that left only Ed and his mother. So eventually, his mother, Augusta, had a stroke. So Ed had to look after her on his own at the farm. And already, just saying that sentence, you can kind of hear a little bit of similarities between this and Psycho. So eventually, his mum passed away, and this really affected Ed Gein mentally. Like, this probably, a lot of people say this is what pushed him over the edge. This was like the last straw. This was, it's already been proven that he was mentally unhinged because he allegedly killed his own brother. So it's clearly all there. It is there. This isn't something that only happened after his mum's death. But it's been brewing, and this just made it even worse. So the crimes that Ed Gein went through after that was basically grave robbing, and only females. Like, he would dig them up weeks after they were buried and take parts of them. Like, they found a corset made from a female's torso, from the shoulders to the waist. And basically what the whole motive was, why he was doing all this, there was even faces, masks he would wear as females. He was basically trying to become his mother. That was the whole point. He wanted to see what it was like from her point of view. These are words that he said. This is what he told the police. This is the psychology he had, that he was trying to become his mom so he could see why she was like this, so he could understand. But it's disturbing, because things he was doing, and that was only grave robbing. He hadn't even got to the point where he was going out and murdering women so he could take parts of them. Disturbing shit. But the whole point is, Psycho, heavily influenced by Ed Gein, as Norman Bates clearly has mother issues and was tortured mentally by his mother, and in the end he dressed up as her because he wanted to become her. So you see the influence. So yeah, interesting stuff. Really is fascinating. But yeah, so Psycho, heavily influenced by Ed Gein. Now let's talk about what other movie was influenced by Ed. And this is probably the most obvious. Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now this movie came out and shocked the world. It was even banned from various countries because of how shocking it was. And who knows, maybe deep down, people banned it and hated it because it reminded them of the shocking events from Ed. But either way, everyone knows the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface, who, fun fact, Ed Gein was actually known as the original Leatherface. Literally. Because, there's so many scenes in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that took influence and even copied some of the crime scenes from Ed Gein. Like, there was a lamp made out of a human face. That's actually something that was found in Ed's home after he was arrested. All of the bones that are used as decoration. Ed Gein, you took the bones from the bodies he dug up and killed, and he would turn them into cutlery and utensils and stuff like that, you know. He used there's a skull that Ed Gein took. It's of a head, and he carved it whatever into a skull, and he cut the top off it and uses it as like a jar. It's like messed up, but that is also in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the dinner table near the end. You see it, and you see the lamp made of a face above. So interesting stuff. And what's interesting is that Ed Gein always denied having intercourse with these bodies. Why? Because apparently they smelt bad. Really, Ed? That's where you draw the line? But yeah, so it's so obvious to see, like, Psycho took influence from Ed Gein more psychologically. Texas Chainsaw Massacre took influence by the crimes themselves and the results of those crimes. You know, and cannibalism. Now, there's rumor that Ed Gein was eating some of them, but it's more decorations he used. You know, like there was a chair with flesh and skin he used as, you know, the base of it. But yeah, pretty messed up stuff. But yeah, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now the next movie influenced by Ed Gein is Silence of the Lambs. Now, this may or may not have been an obvious one, but the character of Buffalo Bill was known to be quite heavily inspired. You know, the whole concept, like cannibalism or whatever, but yeah, so the character primarily Buffalo Bill, he was influenced by Ed Gein and the performance and just the similarities characteristically. You can see. So that's, yeah, pretty interesting. Buffalo Bill. Damn it, Bill. Anyway, the next movie influenced by Ed Gein is The Hills Have Eyes, the original. Now, Wes Craven himself has even gone on record to say that Ed Gein's crimes are what influenced him to make the story and the characters, which kind of makes sense. You know, they're all not to do with them being deformed, but a messed up family, and it's interesting. I'm assuming it's primarily the crimes that influenced him. You know, all the creepiness, the way people were killed and gruesome ways and stuff. But it's interesting how Wes seen that and was influenced. And I mean, fair enough, you can look at both of them and say, but they're two different things. But if you really think about it, there are some similarities in ways, you know. So, yeah, The Hills of Eyes, influenced by Ed Gein and his crimes. So, all those movies, you know, Silence of the Lamb, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psycho, just think what movies we got from their influence onwards. Psycho, you know, Halloween, you know, that's clearly, without Psycho, we wouldn't have had Halloween. Without Halloween, we wouldn't have had Friday the 13th, and so on. You know, it's interesting. Now, the crimes of this man, if you want to call it a man, I feel like Dr. Loomis all of a sudden. Don't you think we refer to him as it? If you say so. No, it. The crimes that he did. And there's a lot of people, believe it or not, that would defend him and feel sorry for him, you know. Oh, it wasn't him. His mother molded him into what he became. No. I just can't, like. But then again, you wanna you could flip the coin and say, we wouldn't have got all these movies if not for this monster and the things that he did. But I'm one of those people who can separate the art from the artist. So I look at all the movies, they were made by the directors. That's where I draw the line. I don't need to look at him and say, thank you, hey, you did a great job, man. You gave us great movies. No. They're two separate things and I can't separate them, but there's people out there, I don't know, everyone has different opinions. There's billions and billions of people in the world. They're all gonna have different opinions and thoughts. But it's an interesting concept, It's fascinating to sit and just think about it, and think, what are other people's opinions, and listen to what they think about it. And so let me know in the comments below, what do you think about that? And what is your thoughts on the whole thing? Fascinating, huh? But overall, we've got some phenomenal movies, and crimes or not, it's all horror. It's all horror. Good, bad, and yeah, history has a funny way of molding itself. Everything happens for a reason, as they say. It's fascinating, and it's how those horror movies have molded us as viewers and as human beings. A lot of people, horror is their world. And the horror community in general is actually some of the most nicest and passionate communities out there in any genre. And they're genuinely some of the nicest people in the community. So it's interesting, isn't it? When you think of it like that as well. Anyway, if you stuck it this long, thank you so much for watching. I wholeheartedly appreciate it, and I appreciate all of you. And yeah, let me know in the comments. What are your thoughts? Love you all, and as always, don't kill anyone or dig them up.